come from a mixed family. My dad is African American. My mom comes from a German family, Anglo-American. So interesting that I become what a lot of people call mixed person. If you're mixed, there is a common question that every person mixed gets asked. What are you? Like, am I a dog breed? Or I don't know, I don't know. I get that a lot. Like, what are you? Like, a few years ago, I was in Canyon, Texas, in the panhandle of Texas, and I was at university, so we had like a big pool. I was with my little brother, and he's like mixed like me, obviously, because we're the same. But he's a little lighter skinned though. But we're at the pool, and we're going around, and there's this lady. She's an older lady, white lady, sweet lady. Like, we talked to her a few minutes. But so she's getting her rehabilitation, in the pool, because, it's good for some people that have those aches and pains to get in the pool and kind of like work out in that sense. And so she starts talking to us, and she's just like, oh my goodness. She's just like, what are you guys? And I was like, well, my dad is black, African American, and my mom, their side's German. And she goes, oh, wow. So you get the brains and the athleticism. And I was like, I like to think I'm athletic and smart, so sure, but I don't really think it has to do with being German or black. I just kind of think, I'm okay at school and I'm a little athletic, sure. But those are just kind of the interesting things that people ask you when you're mixed. Like, what are you? And they're like, oh, wow, German, black, wow. And that was interesting growing up. So I spent most of my time growing up in a Hispanic background in El Paso, Texas. But I did spend some time down south. I was born in California, lived in Phoenix, and then moved to South Carolina. I was in Charleston. And interesting learning about slavery in South Carolina when you're my skin color, my complexion. Going through kind of learning about it. Of course, I was little, so they weren't going to tell us like the gruesome details of slavery at that age. They kind of work you up to that. So in high school, I got a little bit more of the deeper stuff. Of course, that was further west. But so I remember we would go on these field trips to the plantations, and I mean the whole time I'm just thinking, man, I kind of know a little bit about slavery. I was like, this is pretty crazy, walking the grounds where my ancestors have walked and where my ancestors have worked, and slavery is such a hot button, little history term, but walking there, and then so we're going. I'm with it's me and maybe two of the black kids in our class. It's South Carolina, but we were kind of on the military base, so a lot of the kids at my school is a bit of everybody. So there's a lot of white kids, a lot of Mexican kids or Hispanic kids, and a lot of a few black kids. In my grade at least. So we're in class, we go to this field trip, and so we're going, and they take us there, and we get these big baskets of rice, and we're kind of we're sifting them out, and there's a lady there teaching us songs they sang, and it was kind of cool, but it was also kind of this is not as happy as you guys make it seem. I grew up, and I was like, dang, I don't know, that just doesn't seem right, and they take us and they show us the houses, and I mean, they have the little slave quarters were probably a fourth of this room. And they just would tell us, a family would live in there. And now I'm we're 40 people probably. Come on. But that was just kind of a weird thing. All my classmates are oh, this is so fun. I'm like, man, this is not cool. But me and the other black kids in the class are man, come on. No, I'm just kidding. But so that was kind of interesting. But I got a lot of things for being mixed, a lot of interesting nicknames. One time in class, we were kind of talking about race, not because about racism, but just kind of oh, you're this color, well, you're this color. And they'd be well, they look at me I mean, you're black, but you're kind of white. Black on the outside, white on the inside, kind of. They'd be hey, you're like a newspaper, or maybe a zebra. And no, Oreo, white on the inside, black on the outside. All right. I get called the whitest black kid people know and stuff like that. I was just all right, whatever. I kind of embraced it. I thought it was kind of a fun joke just to play along with. It didn't really ever bother me at those ages. But it was really interesting because I do things and people would be well, why would you do that? I was just I don't know. In 2008, I was probably the only black kid in America. In my mock election, I voted for McCain instead of Obama, and people were why? I don't know. I just feel like everyone was doing Obama, so why not be different? It wasn't, for me, it wasn't racing because I grew up in so many cultures. It just didn't really, of course, like now I look back like, man, how cool is that I saw the newspaper from when Obama became the first black president. Like, so neat. Like, it was just a cool thing to experience. And maybe I don't agree politically on everything, but it still was something that's just, I'm really blessed and grateful I got to be a part of. Like, my grandfather is just super proud of Obama because he grew up, in a way different time than a lot of people my age have grown up in. So for him, seeing that, really kind of cool to look in that perspective. But so interesting things like that. And the fun thing is like family stuff. So with a white mom and having a white best friend for some of my life, going places could be interesting because you're like, oh, well, this is my son and his friend. So instantly people would just assume I'm the friend. I'm like, oh, no, my mom, not his mom. Like, but if my grandparents didn't happen, we go to Colorado, and be like, oh, what are you guys up to? Like a waitress or a waiter would be like, what are you guys up to? It's like, oh, with my grandson and his friend. And they'd always look at my friend Michael and be like, oh, okay, cool, you're with your grandparents. And I'd be like, no, me, actually. But that was always kind of fun. And then like family reunions. So I'm in this big, my mom's side of the family, the white side is like huge, like 100 people. We got a picture of that. Is that there somewhere? Yeah, so like that's my mom's side. This is my great grandfather and my great grandma. I love them dearly. But so it's funny because like part of me came from my great grandfather and great grandmother, which is kind of cool. And so did all these people. And I always think it's interesting. It's like, man, like it's kind of cool that I have these little cousins that are white, and it's kind of cool, like man, we're part of the same blood. And I think that's just like a cool physical representation of being under the same blood of Jesus Christ. I just love that. Like, it's just so cool. And that's like half my family. I love them dearly. But yeah, it's always interesting though. I'm always like one of the little cousins like, you look a lot different than me. I don't know. But so it was interesting, like growing up, but especially I lived in a more Hispanic context. So I was still a minority, but I wasn't like the minority amongst a lot of white people. I was a minority amongst a bunch of Hispanics. So my high school was the black high school, except it was still mostly Hispanic people, except we just happened to have the most African American people. So we got deemed the black school and the ghetto school and all that stuff. So that was just kind of an interesting little part of my life. So for me, like at that time, racism was a little different for me because I grew up around a different minority that felt the pressure of being Hispanic and having parents from like being first generation immigrants or first generation Americans, kind of the interest of that. Like that was a really cool perspective to kind of gain and understand that part a little more. But so it was just growing up in that context gave me better perspective, but I was always a little ashamed of my race, if I'm honest. I was always a little bit ashamed of being black. And I think a lot of that came from my inexposure to my own people. Now, not that I'm any different, like I always kind of said like, well, I'm just as white as I am black, because the way I saw it is like, if I have these super white family members and I have these super black family members, why can't I be both, But our culture says you're either one or the other. I actually read a study kind of talking about that. I can't remember all the like statistics that was found in the research, but it's kind of like the way mixed people are perceived by the predominant races is a little different. Like African American people will see you as sometimes more white or sometimes more black, and same for white people. They'll see you sometimes as more black or white. It's kind of weird. But so that was just a very hard time for me because I was just like, I feel like I didn't know myself. And I was like, well, I kind of just embraced the whole Oreo thing. I was like, maybe I'm just like a white guy trapped in a black guy's body. I don't know. Kind of feeling that tension of like differences because, like the black people I knew were a lot different than the white people I knew. My families were so different. Like going to a family gathering with my black family was a whole different experience than going to a family gathering with my white family. Totally different. And sometimes I almost felt alienated against both groups because it's like, I don't feel like I'm black. Like I don't feel like, I have the attitude or the, get going, I love it, the resilience. But then sometimes I'm like, well, I'm with my white family. I'm like the only black person. I just kind of like stick out all the time, So it's kind of a hard season for me just to really embrace myself. But what happened for me was when I changed my context and I went to Amarillo Canyon, Texas, the Panhandle. Very different. Like, I felt like El Paso, Texas, if you look at Texas as a state, El Paso's way out west, and Amarillo's way up here. So going up there, it was like still a good amount of Hispanic people, but like a lot more white people. And then, of course, it was crazy coming here, but that's another story. But it was like a ton of white people. I was like, okay, like, and I'm not going to lie, because of my inexposure to like any real racism or like, just kind of the assumptions the media had fed me, because of course I'm living amongst mostly Hispanics, so my context is way different. I'm just on edge. I'm like, okay, like, I'm gonna, like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want people to look at me and judge me, or like people are just gonna like, like, oh, and I'm like, oh no. And I was, for one, I got it twisted a few times. Like one time I was at church, I saw a friend of mine, and I was like, oh, that guy looks like he does not like black people. I don't know, he just looked real country. I was like, he must not like black people. And then I see a guy who was also became one of my friends, a black guy, go up to him, and they're like, yeah, what's up, dude? I was like, all right, okay, I'm dumb. Like, that was a little exaggerative, but I did have funny moments. I went to a Methodist church in Canyon, and one day I walked in, I was playing drums for the Contemporary, and there's like a kind of like an hour gap between, like, so I get there to rehearse right after the traditional service left out, and then I would go and practice before the Contemporary. So as a traditional service is walking out, an older white gentleman walks up to me, and he is amped to see me. He comes up to me, he's like, I'm so glad you're here. And I'm just like, I'm a really shy guy, so I'm like, thank you, sir, I'm glad you're here. And he's still shaking my hand. He's like, you know why? I'm like, why? He's like, you bring some color to this church. And then I talked to my 3 other black friends that go to the church, and they're like, yeah, he told us the same thing. And it's like, I saw that he was genuine about it, but I don't think he understood, it could come off the wrong way. But it was just like funny things like that would happen. The most interesting part was, coming to the climax, going to work at a church in a very small white town in the Panhandle, Texas. It's like probably like half the size of Wilmore. There's no university or seminary. Like there's a few gas stations and churches. But so going there was just real interesting because I was actually going after my friend Kendall, who was a youth pastor, and so he kind of lined me up in an interview and like talked me up to the pastor. He's like, yeah, like, oh, this is Trey. He's a great guy. Like, cool, we're going to bring him up and we'll interview and we'll talk. And he's like, cool. So I guess like it didn't hit Kendall because Kendall, good guy, doesn't see color like that, doesn't think about that stuff. At the time, he's a little more aware of that now, but at the time he was still a little less aware of those kind of conversations. And Kendall says, Steve, like, do you think it'll be like a problem with Trey being black? And the pastor thinks, he says, I don't think so, because it's like all white church, pretty white town. He says, I don't think so. He's like, unless he's dating a white woman. And this is my white princess right here, my wife, who I was in fact dating. I was just like, I got to Canyon, I met her. I was like, where's the white woman at? I'm just kidding. But I was just like, for me, it's like I just don't think about those things. And of course, he was just joking. Like, he was a great guy. I love that guy to death. It's just kind of those funny moments where people just don't think. We don't always think about what we say, or And it's true, there can be some complications and things like that. And that's another bigger conversation about interracial marriages and stuff. That's a very big part of my life, being in one and then being the product of interracial marriage. But so I would say that the conflict of being too black or too white kind of came to a head in about 2015, where like, kind of things were picking up, like the Black Lives Matter movement, I think around that time was starting to pick up, and like people were becoming, because of course, there's a very big election coming up, and there's a lot of stuff going on. Like you guys know, we're still kind of in that in a sense, but it was kind of coming to a head, and I was just like, man, like I just don't know like what to feel. I don't know what to think, because like my heart, for me, I still feel like, I'm just as white as I am black in a sense, like I'm still a part of these two heritages and these stories. But then I started to think back on like bad experiences I've had. Like my first ever exposure to any kind of racism was I was at a water park with my one of my really good friends in South Carolina at the time. His name was Julian, and I was with his mom, and we called her Miss Stephanie. And we're at the water park, and there's like this part in the water park where this bucket fills up with water, and you can just pour it, and it pours to the lower section, like to people walking the little bridge below. So I'm a kid. There's water everywhere. I don't care. I'm just running around like, the water's just falling on me, whatever. And then I see Julian's mom. She's standing there with another black lady, and they're just talking, and they're kind of like, and I'm like, and they kind of pull. She tells me and Julian, she's like, y'all come here, and like, oh, what's going on? It's like, well, those are 2 or 3 white kids at the top with the bucket, and like, well, they're only pouring it on the black kids. And I'm like, okay. Like, I didn't really understand. I was like, all right, like, that's weird, but sure, okay, whatever. But so they told the lifeguard, and the lifeguard told them, they're going to splash people, they got to splash everybody. You can't just be splashing specific people. And then so I kind of asked Miss Stephanie on the way home, like, Miss Stephanie, like, why was that? Why were they doing that? Why were they pouring it only on the black kids? She says, well, the way some people are raised, and some people are just, well, she must have said they're stupid. But the way people are raised, some people just don't like you because you're black. It wasn't necessarily worded exactly like that, but I was just like, in my little 8-year-old, 9-year-old mind, that made absolutely no sense, because like, I'm just as white as those kids, like, I'm like, I've got white family members, like, what makes me any different from them? And just thinking of other things that happened growing up and things like that, and just bad situations, or just like being singled out by a few teachers in middle school and stuff for my behavior, just stuff like that, when it was just like, I'm doing just what everyone else is doing, but why am I being treated so differently? But it all kind of came to a head at that point, and it really was really hard for me, but I also kind of began to learn and accept and appreciate other people's cultures more, and understanding that, which I'm about to get into, is that I need to engage those people better to understand their perspectives. Like, why do you think this way? Because there's obviously, like, racism is not Christian, it's not Jesus, and it's not the gospel. But I'm like, well, I wonder why these people think that way. Why are they wired like this, My Aunt Robin, when I was very, 2 or 3 months old, she gave me a book. It was from 1995, and it said it was a book about the greatest leaders of African American leaders, and I always had this book for a long time, but I just never really opened it. I was just like, I don't know, I was like, that's cool. I just didn't really think about it, and I opened it a few years ago. And she had written me a message. It was written about 2 months after my birthday when I was born. And it said, in short, kind of just summing up the 2 sentences that really especially have resonated for me, is she says, you are a part of you're the best of 2 worlds. You get the best of 2 different stories. So walk in pride and walk in love. Walk in being proud of who you are and walk in love for other people. And it's just always meant so much to me now, because now I really understand that my story is very itchy for some people. Some people aren't very pumped about me being half and half, or being married to a white woman, or being the son of a white woman. And it's very sticky, Half of my family came here on slave ships. The other half came here as immigrants because they wanted to. One half wanted to come here. One half probably did not want to come here. And that's itchy. But so the question I've thought of is, how do we engage other cultures? How do we engage people that are different than us? It's kind of difficult, because I don't always see things the way you're going to see things. But you have a completely different story that got you to where you're at now versus my story. So some bad examples of how to, engage people would be probably saying, you bring some color to this church. Although it's the right intention, there's probably a better way of approaching that. There's probably a better way, but some people just don't understand. Another thing is maybe being introduced specifically to the black people that are visiting the church. It's I think we can introduce everybody, And another thing is refusing to listen to somebody's story. I was preaching a sermon at this same little town, this little church, and I was talking about, so disclaimer, it was about the gospel, not about racism, but I was talking about my story, integrating it into how Jesus listened to people and tried to, he understood where they were coming from, kind of integrating that story. And so in the middle of me telling my testimony, I'm about to round it up and hit I'm pumped. I'm getting there. Someone this older white man stands up, middle of sermon actually. Never seen that happen in the 2 years I was there. Never seen it happen. Stands up, walks right down the middle aisle, right out the back door. And at that moment, if you've ever preached a sermon, you're like, all right, this is going to be interesting when I get out of here. You already know, something is not right. No one just does that. If they go out, they're going to go to the bathroom maybe, not out the back door and out there. And my wife was working as a children's, working with the kids and stuff, and these two kids that happen to be relatives said, is this okay for me to tell? Okay. They said, I don't think my grandpa really likes Trey. And she says, oh, well, why not? And he's like, because he's black. They're 6'5", maybe, something like that. I think another time they said, my grandpa would never let me date a black guy or marry a black man. So I definitely knew it was just because of me, not because of my sermon, or probably was because of my sermon, but apparently he wasn't very happy about me being at the church, which, I will say that church loved us well, and there was a lot more great people than just a few people that weren't very pumped about me, but that's another thing. But refusing to listen, don't be like that guy. Listen, try to understand. And of course, try not to be ignorant. It's so easy to be ignorant to someone else's story because it's not your story. I went to I think at AU last year, they had a really cool racial reconciliation panel. And one of the questions, because there's just students could just submit questions and they'd ask, and they'd answer them on the panel. And one of the questions was, how can there be racism when I've never seen racism? And I'm just well, I may need to engage with some people. So some good examples of engaging culture, I think, is embracing culture, trying to understand and just consuming up that culture and that feeling. Oh man, let me tell you, I loved growing up in a Mexican culture. It was great. They taught me so much about family and just really spending time with those people that you love and those people you're close with. I mean, me and my friend Ivan yesterday were feeling nostalgic, and we were fixing my car, and we had Mexican music playing in the background as we're fixing the car, and I was we were both just engaging, just embracing that culture and just trying to love and find the appreciation for it. Learning people's stories, and most importantly, listening to people, listening to their stories. That's how we engage and how we recognize their issues. I was talking to a good friend of mine the other day, and he said a quote in our conversation. He's saying hey, if people say that their lives don't matter, we should be listening to why they think that. Whether it's true or not, we need to be trying to understand why do they think that way, And it's kind of even when people say, well, all lives matter, I was all right, why do you think that, Of course, we all can agree with that. And of course, when police are saying, well, blue lives matter, it's okay, why do you think that, It's not saying that any of those are right or wrong, but, we learn so much when we engage and listen to people. I've learned so much getting to talk to my father-in-law and getting to talk to my good friends who are in law enforcement and getting to hear the heartbreak and the stories and just the, being, for some of them, having the pressure of being well, you're a cop, blah, 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 and not knowing the things that they've done, the families they've seen torn apart and all the just crazy things they've seen. I had one of my white friends that's a cop tell me a story over Facebook the other day, and it just broke my heart, just hearing that and just hearing him in his genuine heart of people just don't understand, But I'm just it was so enlightening for me just to hear from him versus letting the media tell me what to think about that. And I think we can learn that on both sides. Don't let the media tell you what to think. Go talk to somebody that's white. Go talk to someone that's black or Mexican or Asian or that grew up in a completely different background, because you'll learn so much. So I think it all comes down to engagement, and engagement starts with recognizing, which is what session 1's about, recognizing racism. But recognizing is just the very beginning. Okay, we can't stop at recognizing. Of course, we're going to kind of go through that, this whole thing, but it starts with recognition. And recognition is really just pity. Really just being like, all right, I see that. You struggle with that. Okay. But that's so light. Like, of course I can recognize that. I can recognize that somebody is homeless without a jacket, but how am I going to engage that person besides just recognizing and knowing and acknowledging that? So pity goes into sympathy. And sympathy is saying, I care about your issue. I care about your problem. And of course, if you care, it should move you into having empathy and feeling like, I feel your problem. I feel what's going on. And of course, with that, it goes into compassion, which I think is love. Like, I love you enough that I'm going to do whatever I can to relieve you of this issue, to relieve you of this heartbreak. See, you can't love your neighbor if you're not going to acknowledge their hardships. And if you're in Christ Jesus, you can't not love your neighbor. Like, that's just not God's nature. God's nature is to love and engage in you and engage in our lives and engage in the world around us. See, like, I think of it like this. God, this is the gospel. God recognized that we are broken and that we are sinful and that we are in a fallen state. Like, can you imagine if God was just like, oh, man, there's a lot of sin down there. I acknowledge that. Cool. Like, no, like, God didn't just, like, acknowledge our sin. Like, He came. He said, I recognize your sin and it's broken. And He says, and I care. I care enough that I'm going to send my son, Jesus. And He came and He took on flesh. And He felt the hardships. He felt the sin, the temptation. He felt pain. He took all of our sins. And the way He loved us was by doing that. You know, if God loves us, He's going to recognize, He's going to care, He's going to feel, and He's going to relieve us of our sin. That's the gospel. And if we can't do that with other people, then we're not really being great imitators of Christ. Because the gospel says that we are to love our neighbor, that we need to engage our neighbor. Yeah. But it starts with recognition. But it goes beyond recognition. You have to, it requires action. Like, you got to do something. You know, and of course, there's only so much we can do in some situations. I'm not saying you need to go, like, end racism. Like, you're not just going to go and do that in one swoop. Sorry, I wish you could, you know. And there's a lot of sin. But if we believe that God is active in the world around us, and if we believe that we are the body of Christ and we're His hands and feet, then we should be active in the world around us. And in that same sense, whether people believe the same political beliefs, religious beliefs, you know, whatever, like, we should still be engaging in the people around us, and we should still be showing people Christ. So I just want to ask you guys just to think, you know, how can I be engaging people same or different than me? So how much time do I have left? Do I have any timer? I was just going to open up any questions, if anyone had any questions or thoughts or crickets.
Did your mother immigrate as well?
Mm-mm.
Or she was just from a German family that had been here, been in America
Yes.
for a while?
My family.
And then also, she was.
No. She's like few generations down. So my family's so German that my great grandpa in the picture, when he fought in World War II in Europe. Like, he's so German that while he was in World War II liberating concentration camps, he was thinking, how can my aunt and uncle be okay with this? Because they lived in Germany still. So pretty German, yeah. But not like, she didn't immigrate here. Like, I think my family had been settled here for quite a while. Like, I did like an ancestry thing. I think they might have came here in like early 1800s is when my mom's side came to America. Of course, my dad's side, I couldn't find much because it kind of gets weird near the Civil War for obvious reasons. Any other questions?
This is not coming from my point of view, but from listening to my godson yesterday. So I have a Puerto Rican godson.
Okay.
And unfortunately, he watched way too much of the UMC conference. He just broke my heart yesterday because he felt like I can't say anything anymore. Like, it does have to do with his ethnicity as well. And it broke my heart that he feels like no one anywhere is listening to him.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking, and I've heard different stories like that from my from different cultures and people and places, and it's difficult. Well, I don't think anyone of a different culture needs to educate another group, but at the same time, I need to hear your voice, and if you're not going to tell it to me, I will never learn. And I don't know how to encourage him right now in the middle of his pain, and I'm happy enough that at least he was willing to call and talk and like cry for hours on the phone last night, but I don't want him to stop talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and I don't have those stories that tell him like it's okay to keep talking.
Yeah. It's so hard, especially being in like a culture like America is. You know, sometimes I think, you know, like I said, we let the media tell us so much of how to think and how to live and how to act. You know, we let our skin color determine who we are versus knowing that we're, you know, sons and daughters of God. And yeah, I can definitely relate to that because growing up in my culture, in my like background, it kind of always felt like I was on the fringes of on the edge of society. Like, you know, it's like, I'm like, I don't feel like I belong with African American people, but I don't really feel like I belong with the white people. And it's just kind of like, I'm just like kind of this in between, because even statistics of people that are mixed like me is like super slim, you know. And so it's hard, you know, sometimes like knowing like, do I have a voice? But I think the best, yeah, is just listening, just like letting vent and just kind of talk through. Because, I mean, I think at one point with my wife, I just like, whoa, like, here's all this stuff. And, you know, sometimes I feel for her because I'm like, well, she's, you know, grown up in a very white context, so she's going to be raising a black kid, you know. So it is tough. And I don't have all the answers, but I know like listening and like genuinely, sincerely engaging like that is like where it starts, you know. Did I kind of answer the question?
I'm just going to keep listening. So.
You're good. Okay. About time, or do we got? Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.